It's a wonderful day in the homiehood, a wonderful day for a homie. Won't you be my homie to Taro? Yo, today is the first day of March, and we are going to dig into the Canadian headlines, including a bit of my own spin, which is why we call this segment Headlines and Hot Takes. It's not just headlines, but it's also hot takes. So, this is a bit of old news at this point. This is from yesterday, and it's people have been talking about it for a while. But the Dilbert distributor has now severed ties with the comic strip creator Scott Adams over racist remarks. So, as it turns out, this person, Scott Adams, is indeed a racist. Um, and they're facing the consequences for their actions. So newspaper readers around the country, I assume they're talking about the U.S. because this is based in the U.S., have have been greeted with notes from publishers. Some even saying that they are going to leave that area of the newspaper blank for a month as a reminder that racism is pervasive in our society. For me, as someone who designed newspaper pages, leaving the space blank is kind of like a bit of a bad design choice. Like, you could fill that space with like a black comic or something like that, Like I feel like it's a bit of a lazy way to support uh anti-racist action, but it is glad to see that people are taking any action at all. So two of Canada's largest newspapers, the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star, have also dropped the Dilbert comic strip over its creators' remarks, which I mean is like the great news, because there's tons of like racist people who get printed in the newspaper all the time. The great news really is that we will no longer have to suffer these very boring and unfunny comics anymore. So thank goodness. That is the real win here. So Scott Adams, he has, I guess, a podcast or a YouTube channel, and he was there. He was talking about how a Rasmussen report survey had asked people whether they agreed with the statement, "It's okay to be white." Now, most agreed, but Adams noted that 26% of black respondents disagreed and others weren't sure. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what's wrong with that? Is it okay to be white? And, like, of course, it's okay to be a white person. But this phrase exactly, "it's okay to be white," is kind of similar to like all lives matter. It's racist because nobody is saying it's not okay to be white. People are advocating for themselves to be um not harassed by systemic forces of racism, and in response to people advocating for their own civil rights, white people are saying it's okay to be right. So as the Globe and Mail points out here, it's a trolling campaign by members of 4chan, an anonymous and notorious message board, which is that's where all the white supremacists hang out. And Rasmussen Reports is a conservative polling firm that has used its Twitter account to endorse false and misleading claims about COVID-19 vaccines, elections, and the January 6, 2021 attacks. So we basically know where this is coming from, and you would think someone who has spent their entire life being published in newspapers would be able to discern the difference between fake news and real news. So Scott, his last thing that he said here was that he would no longer help Black Americans, and if you watch the video, it is actually quite shocking how he phrases it and puts emphasis behind it. So I'm trying to get through the news really quick, so this time I'm actually literally going to read just a headline. MPs summon Google CEO to Ottawa for blocking news access for some Canadians. This is something that we have covered in recent days, and I mean, I guess we will be covering it in the future as well, because these employees of Google have been summoned to Ottawa to testify and say why are you blocking news sites for one in every 25 Canadians. And it's really a display of corporate strength here, big tech strength, that they're able to influence Canadians in this way. So I'm glad some MPs are trying to hold their feet to the fire. We'll see what comes of it. there's a new book revealing the details on how Omar Khadr was kept in Guantanamo Bay prison. Now, this was a story that was trending quite a long time ago. And now some new evidence is coming out, which is very condemning of the Harper government. It's saying here that Hillary Clinton told Omar Khadr's lawyer over a decade ago that Washington was prepared to repatriate the Canadian citizen and Guantanamo Bay detainee. But then Prime Minister Stephen Harper was blocking the move, according to a new book. That would appear to contradict the Harper government's insistence that it was refusing to request the former child soldier's return to Canada out of a deference to U.S. sovereignty and the American judicial process. However, this new book is throwing some mud here at former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and saying that there were many opportunities. In fact, the U.S. came to Canada and said, "Hey, we can repatriate Omar Khadr," and Stephen Harper was basically like, "Nope, nope, nope. This is your problem." Unfortunately, what this led to was Omar Khadr pleading guilty in exchange for an 8-year sentence. So the American judicial system is like much harsher than the Canadian judicial system. There was potentially a chance here for Omar Khadr to be, maybe under different circumstances. A lot of people in the U.S. judicial system, they take a plea deal and they end up pleading guilty because that's the only way that they can get a lightened sentence. Instead of like the very harsh system coming down on them, they opt for a lighter sentence. So who even knows if he's guilty, really? But it's a story that I don't really remember that fondly, but he was released on bail in 2015, and in 2019, an Alberta judge ruled that his sentence had formally expired. So during his decade in Guantanamo Bay, Mr. Khadr was reportedly subjected to treatment that Mr. Trudeau later called torture, including severe sleep deprivation and being dragged across the floor through his own urine. So, I mean, I think it goes without saying that if Canada can avoid their own citizens or people who are under their protection from being put into Guantanamo Bay, then that would probably be a good thing and action that we should pursue. Hey, good morning, Jay Casey. Now, this is an interesting story coming out of Calgary, something I have pretty mixed feelings about. Some police forces in Canada are beginning to consider attacks on homeless people as hate crimes. And my first instinct kind of reading the headline was like, well, that's great. We should consider these things hate crimes. We should have harsher sentencing for people who are attacking people simply because they live in poverty, right? But kind of thinking about it a bit more, I'm not quite sure how I feel. So after frontline officers investigated a case here in Calgary where somebody, stabbed a homeless person in the back, the Calgary Services Hate Crimes Unit made a decision virtually unheard of in the Canadian justice system. Police concluded the stabbings were not ordinary assaults, but rather hate-motivated crimes against homeless people. Assaults on homeless people are almost never classed as hate crimes in Canada because the criminal code does not specifically identify people living on city streets as a marginalized group. This means offenders who target homeless people usually don't receive the stiffer penalties Canadian law reserves for crimes motivated by prejudice. So I think that is good. I think there should be harsher sentencing for people who attack the unhoused. However, we also know that the unhoused are constantly under attack from police, and they are constantly disproportionately targeted for crimes that are simply a result of them being in poverty. So I think that unless they are going to police themselves, which, as we have already kind of joked in chat, they're not very good at doing, this is a bit of a weird kind of nuance that we need to approach. And my other concern is that this could potentially take away from what is normally considered a hate crime, which here is classified as hate crime victims being targeted based only on their race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression. So, I mean, I obviously think that there should be harsher penalties, but I wouldn't want it to take away from the statistics and the data being collected about these things in particular as well. And maybe it wouldn't have to. I just think maybe in this case there should be a special designation. I also feel very strongly that like media, police, municipalities, and the governments in general, they are constantly stigmatizing poor people and homeless people. So the fact that there are hate crimes against them, I guess, am I saying calling them hate crimes now? The fact that there is an increased rate of like violence against people in that demographic is like kind of no surprise, and we need to take responsibility kind of like as a broader society. So it's the same thing when like, oh my goodness, there's increased hate crimes against Asian people after all of this like xenophobic media has been published. It's like, well, like maybe we have some responsibility as a society to take care of folks. So anyways, this is a really kind of an interesting case. We will see if it's something that will spread across Canada. So the criminal code actually does allow for police to assert that a suspect was motivated by hatred for any other similar factor. So I guess I don't know. Are we going to start including poverty in these factors for what constitutes a hate crime? I think it's maybe not the worst idea, but I am again a bit skeptical. It goes on here to say that of course, like people who are unhoused have a very different relationship with police because they are in a way obviously the victims of policing, and police officers routinely check them for poverty related offensive, especially if you are meeting multiple intersectionalities here. Like if you are a racialized person, especially if you're black or indigenous and you're homeless, you're going to have an increased rate of being policed unjustly. So personally, I would like to address that systemic problem where police are disproportionately targeting people of color in Canada and unhoused people in general. And yeah, this an expert here saying that there's a massive trust gap between society's poorest people and the police. Thank you, Ribert, for the letting us know we're at the 10-minute mark. So anyways, getting into our international news here, as we now have to every day. This is an update on the international relationships between Canada, China, the United States, and Russia, which seems to be a daily thing now. They are now saying that foreign interference did not affect the outcome of the 2021 election, according to a report. So if you've been following the news in the past week or so, the past 10 days, they have been going with these headlines that are like China interfered with the election, China interfered with the election, China interfered with the election. And now a report is saying, you know what? Well, there was foreign interference, but it didn't affect the outcome of the 2021 election. And that is kind of what a lot of people have been saying from the very beginning as well. And one thing that is concerning to me is that they print these headlines, but they are also paywalled. So a lot of people, they don't even get to read past the headline. A lot of people don't know you can run these articles through archive.ph in order to unblock them. A lot of people, they don't subscribe to the Globe and Mail or watch My Homie Tutaro on YouTube. So they might not get the full article and figure out what it's about. So I feel like there's been all this fear mongering. And now that the damage is done, they're coming out and saying, oh, well, there's a report saying that it didn't impact the electoral integrity. So it's really just like well, you've already built this narrative that China has involved itself in our elections, and now the report is saying otherwise. So, but the damage, again, already done. So, national security agencies saw attempts at foreign interference, but not enough to have met the threshold of impacting electoral integrity. Morris Rosenberg, a former deputy minister of foreign affairs, wrote in the report for the federal government. However, the report recommends that Ottawa consider adjusting the rules for when the public is alerted of foreign interference to account for incidents that might fall below the threshold. So, to me, this is the news. The news is that CSIS leaked information to the Globe and Mail and what seems to be like the conservatives that said that China was interfering with the election. However, they're now saying that that information fell below the threshold, which would be constituted foreign interference. So that like I said, the damage is already done, and now just that all of this information that is below the threshold has been released, and people have formed their opinions. Pierre Poilievre is going to condemn Justin Trudeau, and conservatives are going to run with this as if it's true. In 2019 and 2021, the panel, as part of the protocol, determined that the government of Canada did not detect foreign interference that threatened Canada's ability to have free and fair elections, the report says. It's like, okay. So the conservatives say that they lost several ridings. Of course, Aaron O'Toole is like breathing in the copium heavy because it directly affected him, although this report says it didn't directly affect him. And my thing is that, propaganda influences the way that people vote. But at the end of the day, how do you decide who voted at the voting booth based on fake news or real facts? And how do you decide, whose votes are influenced by what factors? It's impossible to keep track of something like this. So to say that China planted some information in Canadian news sources that influenced the way Chinese Canadians voted for certain liberal candidates is like, okay, and the whole thing that we engage in, if you read an article in the newspaper and it influences the way that you vote, is this not influence, or it's just okay when Canadian journalists do it? But we also know that there's a lot of bad actors out there. There's a lot of people who print disinformation and have a vested interest. It's the same people that will work at Rebel News and cry freedom because of vaccines will also tell you that you're not allowed to be trans or get an abortion because they have their own political agenda, and they dabble in fake news and they influence a certain amount of voters. But we don't consider this election influencing an election unjustly. So I don't know. This to me raises a lot of questions. I think now that this report is coming out, it strikes me as it's all kind of BS. Okay, trying to keep this under 20 minutes. The other funny thing that is happening on this front is that Chinese donors who funded the Trudeau Foundation, something we covered yesterday, wanted a statue of Mao in Montreal. And again, this to me is like, why is this even a headline? Who cares? So some wealthy Chinese donors, they wanted a statue of Pierre Trudeau and Chairman Mao together in the University of Montreal where Pierre Trudeau went. And to me, this is just like a fear-mongering story that they're trying to push. It's like, so what? You're telling me that people in China wanted a statue of their leader at the time who opened diplomatic relationships with Pierre Trudeau? And it's like, it's not a shocking thing to me that someone would want this for their country. I think it's starting to really feel xenophobic at this point, because the author of this story, this journalist, is kind of just unable to put themselves in the shoes of someone else. You know what? And to the credit of this journalist, it might not be their fault, but it seems like this narrative is the direction where mainstream media is going. So one funny thing here is talking about when Pierre Trudeau, met Chairman Mao in Beijing, and Chairman Mao said to Trudeau, he walked Pierre Trudeau to the door and he said, "Don't forget to say hello to your wife." Then Mr. Trudeau's second son, Alexander, was born the same year. I don't even know why they included this in the article. It makes it seem as though Chairman Mao is like the secret father of Alexander Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's brother. Like, what is the implication here? That and because we know there are other conspiracies that say Fidel Castro is Justin Trudeau's father, and it's like, imagine that like every one of Pierre Trudeau's children was the love child of a different foreign leader. I don't know. That seems to be what they're implying in like a kind of like funny way. I swear they just put that in just for like funsies. Um, so yeah, the university here said that Mao had no connection to the university, and then they didn't build the statue. So it's just like, why is this news? I don't know. It really just seems like they needed something to draw out this story about some potential corruption, which to me has yet to be demonstrated, because they donated this money and they said that they are going to get the money back. There's nobody has yet to demonstrate how they got the money back. So this, to me, again, it all seems like BS. So here they're saying that such who is saying this actually? It was David Mulroney, the former Canadian ambassador to China, saying that such a statue of Chairman Mao would be abhorrent to Canadians. It suggests its suggestion reflects the China-centric thinking and focus of even seemingly worldly Chinese tycoons. It's like, okay, I don't know. We have a victims of communism statue in Ottawa, do we not? Like, would it really be the worst thing? Like, okay, yeah, Chairman Mao did some bad things and was responsible for like famine and whatnot, but like maybe this statue is not like something that would be abhorrent to all Canadians. I think it would be mostly abhorrent to all the Canadian landlords out there. So, as Ribert is pointing out in chat, we have met our 20-minute mark, and I would like to thank you so much for tuning into My Homie Tutaro. We're a bit over time, but we're getting better, and we really appreciate you tuning in. If you made it this far, I would like to ask you a special question. Oh shoot, what was it? I had a question for today. Oh yeah, you know what? I was hoping that we could do that silly thing in the comment section where you say first, and then if you're not first, you might say first anyways, or you might say second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. I was hoping we could play that silly game in the comments. So if you are first, definitely be first, and if you're second, also say first, because like, we're all first in our own hearts.